The supplies you need for the petals is the petal colored seed beads in size 11. You'll need some 24 gauge copper core wire in the petal colors and some 30 gauge wire in the petal color. You'll also need, of course, your wire cutters. To prepare, you need to string around 11 inches of beads for each petal that you're making onto the spool of 24 gauge copper core wire, and then you will leave this wire attached to the spool while you are making your petal. That'll help reduce petal or wire waste. So let's get our basic frame set up. I've already got this little loop right in the end of my wire. That's just going to prevent all of my beads from falling off. The pattern says that we have a 5 bead basic row, so let's count out 5 beads. And we've got 11 rows of beads, so our top wire really only needs to be somewhere around 1 inch long. We'll be fine. We have a 3 bead bottom wire extension. So we're going to scoot up 3 more beads off of the spool, and these are going to end up inside the bottom loop for now. So just like the leaves, we're going to set up our basic frame by making a loop in the wire right below that basic frame. The bottom loop should be somewhere around 3 inches long, 2 to 3 inches there. That's the total length of the loop, not how much wire you'll use. So it'll be around 4 to 6 inches of wire there that you're going to curl up into a little loop. And those 3 beads that we scooted up will be caught inside the loop. So again, pinch and hold with one hand right where those wires cross, right below that basic row. And then we're going to twist. Alright, so your spool of wire, your working wire with all the beads on it, should be off to the side. Of course, you've got your basic row in the middle, top wire, your bottom loop with 3 little beads in it. Now to straighten this out, I usually grab the top, grab the bottom, pull in opposite directions, and that should help to straighten your frame out. While you're working, you do want to try and keep this top wire and this bottom wire as straight as possible. If you need to, you can stop after every row to re-straighten them out, just like I did before. Grab the top, grab the bottom, if that helps you, okay? Now we're going to wrap rows 2 and 3 with normal basic frame. We have a pointed bottom and round top. All right, now remember with basic frame that this basic row right here in the middle is row number 1 when you're counting. So right now we are wrapping row 2. And I'm just going to straighten out my beads to make sure that my row is nice and straight, and bring that up right beside that basic row heading towards the top wire. I want my row to be right beside that basic row. I don't want a large gap in my row, one that's going to leave holes in your petal. It's also going to change the shape of your petal. So right beside. And what I usually do is kind of pinch and hold that row together with the basic row to kind of hold it in place. Now we are wrapping with a round top. That means we're going to be wrapping at a 90-degree angle at this top wire. So what I'm going to do, making sure that I'm holding tension on my beads. I don't want gaps to form between my beads. So make sure I'm pushing down on those beads. I'm going to cross over that top wire right above that basic row at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to measure out my beads so they are right at that top wire without going past it. So either right in front of or right on top of that top wire, but don't go past it in any amount. Okay? Cross over to 90-degree angle. I'm going to pinch and hold that row in place, and I'm going to keep tension on my working wire. I don't want a loose wire while I'm trying to wrap. So hold tension on the wire, and we're just going to wrap straight around, keeping a 90-degree angle the whole time. I want to point out here I am crossing over the front. One of the most common errors that I see with beginners is that sometimes they wrap around the back and sometimes they wrap around the front. Unless the pattern specifically says otherwise, you're going to be wrapping around the front. Cross over the front. And I usually use my thumbnail as kind of an anchor there to help keep that wire down, so I get a nice flat wrap there to make a rounded end on the top of my petal. All right, I'm going to bring up beads down from my spool. Make sure that they are sitting on top of that top wire. We do want to cover it as completely as we can. And now we're going to wrap row 3 down to the bottom wire. I'm just going to rotate my petal because it's a little bit easier to wrap my rows when the wire I'm wrapping around is pointing up. Now the bottom has a pointed bottom, and we're going to be using that same 45-degree angle wrap from the leaf. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring beads down the side, make sure I'm flat against right beside that basic row. Down the side, kind of pull and tug on your row this way to kind of help you tighten it in against that basic row. Now I'm going to cross over at a 45-degree angle before I even measure out my beads. And then I'm going to measure beads the same as I do at the top wire. I want to be either right on top of or just a tiny bit in front of it without going past it at all. So this bead right here is pretty close to going past that top wire, but I'm going to leave it because it's going to help me to get a nice sharp point. If I were to subtract that bead, it's going to flatten out my point, and I might also end up with a little bit of exposed bottom wire. But if this bead were going any further past this top wire here, it's going to leave me with a really awkward looking wrap. Alright, so I'm going to measure to there. 45-degree angle. I'm holding tension on my wire while I'm wrapping. I'm going to show you the angle or the wrap that most people do here with this 45-degree angle, and then with the rest of them I'll do my way. Okay, so cross over at a 45-degree angle, pinch and hold that row in place so it doesn't move out of the way while you're wrapping. Hold tension on your wire. We're going to wrap at a 45-degree angle all the way around, and then go up at a 45-degree angle. You'll notice that there is a gap between the two halves of your wrap right there along the bottom wire. That's how you're going to get that 45-degree angle. With this flat wrap up there, there was no gap between the two halves of the wrap, and I'll show you that here in a second. And then you'll bring beads down from your spool and fold them down the side. Kind of push right there at the wrap to make sure you get a nice tight little wrap there. Alright, now the pattern said after row 3 we need to bend our top wire back 45 degrees and wrap the rest of the rows with bent basic. Now I'm going to show you an easy way here to measure out this first row of bent basic. That's usually the hardest part that people have here. So I'm going to show you an easy way here. The easiest way is to actually leave that top wire straight for now. Alright, and we're going to measure out row 4 as if it were a normal row. So cross over at a 90-degree angle there. Rows are right beside each other. And then we're going to reduce by 1 bead. Alright, that's going to leave us a little bit of a gap. We're going to cinch that row in, pull it tight to kind of fill that gap with the beads. And that should actually push that top wire back at a 45-degree angle, which is exactly what you want it to do. Alright, so this is where the top wire would normally be. When I pulled in my row, it kind of pushed my wire back at a 45-degree angle. Now the point here is that we want the future rows to kind of build up behind the petal instead of directly beside. So I'm going to show you more of that once we get a little bit further in there. So reduce by 1 bead, tighten it up, and bend that top wire back at a 45-degree angle. If it does not automatically bend, then you will want to kind of bend it to the back yourself. Alright, then we're going to do that same 90-degree angle wrap. Hold tension, 90 degrees. So let me show you here what I mean. Do you see with that wrap there? That wrap there, there is no space between the top and bottom halves of the wrap. That's how you get a rounded wrap, is with no space there. Now row 5, we need to be very careful. We don't want it to be directly beside row 3. We want it to be a little bit underneath and a little off to the side. Alright, so this, if I reduce a little bit too much there, this way my row ends up kind of right underneath row 3, which is not what we want. That's going to give us too severe of a cupping shape. So I want it just barely off to the side and a little bit underneath. It's kind of hard to show here. We're going to make sure that that top wire stays at that 45-degree angle bend backwards. Alright, then we're going to pinch and hold that row in place. And then I'm going to do my 45-degree angle wrap. Just cross over that bottom wire at a 45 degree. Keep tension on your wire as you're wrapping the whole way around. And then I go up and then kind of down. I still end up with a separation between my bottom and top halves. It's a little bit harder to do it that way, but that's the way that's always just felt natural to me. And you'll bring beads up and cover that bottom wire. Now to wrap row 6, make sure that that top wire is bent backwards at a 45-degree angle, not a 90-degree angle and not straight, but kind of right in between. We're going to measure our row of beads so that the top of our row kind of sits a little bit off to the side and a little bit behind. Not directly behind and not directly to the side, so kind of somewhere in between. That way we get this kind of sloping shape to our petal. Now if you have too few of beads, that row is going to pull directly behind the row and you're going to end up with a teeny tiny petal with too much cupping. And if you have too many beads, it's going to flatten that slope back out and then you get no cupping at all. Now for this particular petal, it would be better for you to end up with no cupping than to have too much cupping. So err on the side of, if you're going to err on the side of making it too flat instead of too cupped. So I'm going to measure my row carefully, check my 45-degree angle there, and I'm going to make sure that row 6 is kind of off to the side but a little bit behind on the top half. Now I kind of squeeze and flatten out the bottom half of my petal with my fingers to help keep that bottom half of my petal flat while making the top a little bit cupped. Alright, so then again I'm going to do that 90-degree angle wrap, so cross over at a 90 degree. I'm going to use my thumbnail as an anchor to keep that wire down so I can get a nice flat wrap up there. And then row 7 I'm going to bring down to this bottom wire. I'm going to twist this a couple more times. Down to the bottom wire. Again, for row 7 I want the top half of my petal to be slightly underneath and slightly off to the side from the previous row of beads. And I want the bottom to be flat. I'm going to cross over at a 45-degree angle wrap there. And wrap. Alright, row 8 is the last row of beads we have before we do our bottom wire extension. So again, before I do row 8, I'm going to check my top wire, make sure it is at that 45-degree angle bend towards the back side of the petal. Remember, the back side is the one that has all the exposed wraps on it. And then the front side should be just beads. Alright, so again, to measure row 8, I'm going to go up there to the top wire. I use my finger, the kind of like the pad of my finger, as kind of a mold right on the inside of my petal to kind of help fit my rows into place. That's how I do it so quickly, is with my thumb, or not my thumb, but the pad of my finger right there in the center of my petal. So again, I want my row to be off to the side, but a little bit behind the previous row of beads. That way I get this nice cupping at the top and straight at the bottom. So check that 45-degree angle bend before you wrap, and then we're going to do that 90-degree angle wrap again. Alright, now our pattern says that we need a 3-bead bottom wire extension before row 9. So we're going to untwist the bottom wires, if there's any twists there, and we're going to locate the wire that's closer to the front. You see how this wire here, when I untwist, it's closer to the front of my petal, and the second wire here is closer towards the back side of my petal. We're going to move those 3 beads in the bottom loop up onto the wire that is closer to the front. And then this wire that's closer to the back is going to lay right behind those beads. We're going to put them right across the back of those beads, and then we're going to retwist these bottom wires. So I kind of hold those beads in place. I use my thumbnail, but you can use whatever you need to there to hold those beads in place. And we're going to retwist those bottom wires as if we were setting up a new basic frame. Alright, you'll want to double check to make sure that that second wire is still behind the beads. Sometimes when you're twisting, it kind of moves off to the side or gets in the way other ways. So you'll want, if it does move over to the side, you'll just kind of grab it and shift it back. You can use pliers if you need to help move it. Make sure that it's on the back side. That way it won't show in your finished petal. All right, now my frame is not straight here, so I'm going to straighten out that bottom wire. And now when we wrap our rows, we're going to wrap them below that extension. So I'm going to, I'm going to show you guys this lace as you go, because I think those of you that this lacing is going to help the most will benefit the most from lacing as you go. So I'm going to cut a few inches of my 30 gauge petal colored wire and fold it in half. And then we're going to insert this wire into the front side of the petal so that the little fold catches right above the top bead in that 3 bead extension. Then cross the wires over the back so they switch places just like we did with the leaf. And then we're going to wrap row 9, and we want to make sure that the top half of row 9 is off to the side and a little bit behind. It looks really easy when I do it because I've done it a billion times. If you are new to this, it's going to take a little bit more effort to line up your rows properly. But just kind of look from the front, make sure that you're getting the same slope to your little domed part, cupped part of your petal. So something like, if it looks like this, you kind of see how it's kind of flattening off there. It doesn't match the slope. And something like that means I have too many beads. I need to take away a couple out of that row. And this right there, it's not matching the slope. It's pulling inward too much. I don't have enough beads in my row, so I would need to add a couple extra there. So keep careful watch. Look at the front, or look at this top little part of the petal to make sure that your sides are gently sloping so you get a wide bowl and not a skinny bowl. All right, off to the side, a little bit behind, and then kind of pinch and hold that row in place. And then I'm going to wrap a 45-degree angle. And then I'm going to wrap lace in row 9 here, and I want to go kind of straight across. Again, I'm bringing my lacing wire around the back of the row, loop around the front, and then cinch that little row of beads in. Now take the time here to really mold your rows tight against that extension. Don't let your rows just do whatever they want to. You can, like I just did there, it was kind of pulling it back behind further than what I wanted to, but I want the bottom of my petal to be flat. So I took a minute there to mold that row back into shape to get it where I need it to be. All right, now we're going to be wrapping row 10. So I'm going to bring beads all the way down so they cover that bottom wire. And I'm going to go up the side. This time I'm going to lace right as I'm wrapping the row. So I'm going to just kind of keep tension on my row of beads, hold it in place, bring the lacing wire around the back of the petal of the row that we're lacing around, and then loop around the row and pull it in. Take a minute, make sure those rows are nice and flat, and then we continue on with the rest of the row. Now you can lace your petals afterwards if you want to. That's actually what I did with the ones that I felt needed it to be laced. So if you don't want to use that lace as you go, it's fine. It's just a tool that you can use. You don't have to do it exactly the same way as I do. All right, I'm going to check my top wire, make sure it's still at a 45 degree. I'm using my finger as a mold to kind of fit my row into place. Make sure that my sides are matching the same slope. I use my finger to kind of create that slope and then fit my beads around it. I'm going to measure out the beads there to the top wire. I'm going to double check, make sure that I'm not making things too loose. Check from the side, make sure I'm flat on the bottom and cupped at the top. Check from the top, make sure that my slope is matching. All right, so then I'm going to do my 90-degree angle wrap. So wrapping around the back and then to the front again. And sometimes if you do get, sometimes with those 90-degree angle wraps, they do end up kind of separating a little bit. The bottom and top halves of the wrap separate a little bit, and if you just kind of push down on the wire there, that helps to flatten it back out. So you don't get a slightly pointed rounded top. You don't want that for this petal. All right, now row 11 is the last row in our petal. So I'm going to mold that down the side. Checking with my fingers, I can feel the inside of my petal. I can tell if that row is pulling in too far, because it's not going to feel like it's in line with the other rows. It's not going to feel like it's at the same sloping angle, and I can tell with my fingers that that's happening. So feel on the inside, use your finger as a mold to kind of keep the same sloping angle there, 45-degree angle slope. We're going to fit that in right around the side. And I'm going to lace now this little row, but you can lace after you wrap at the bottom wire if that's easier for you. All right. Oh, I got a 45-degree angle wrap at the bottom of my petal. So I'm going to cross over at a 45 degree and make my wrap. Now this is the last row in my petal, so I'm going to wrap again to make just a little tiny coil right there, right below my last row of beads. We are going to be using 2 bottom wires instead of, I'm pretty sure we had 3 with the leaves. I can't remember now. But I'm going to cut this off right there below where I've tied off that working wire. Make a little loop in the end of my cut working wire so that my beads don't fall off. Now we're going to cut this bottom loop about right here, just a little ways below the twist, as we don't really need 2 wires for support on these petals. I mostly kept the 2 wires just so I would have a few twists there. I like having these twists here. A lot of people leave them straight. I feel like the twists give me a little bit more grip during assembly and a little bit more support to my petals. So I like to leave 2 there when I can. And then I'm going to cut right there below the twists. So we don't need that to be too long. This is a little bit longer than I need it to be, so I'm going to cut that a little bit shorter. So I have, my bottom wires are 2 different lengths there. And my top wire, I'm going to cut that short and then fold it to the back side of the petal. These lacing wires, I didn't double wrap them while I was lacing those last rows, so I'm going to do that now. Double wrap both of them one more time around that last row. That makes the ends of your lacing wire a little bit more secure. And then I'm going to cut off the ends of those lacing wires. Alright, and there is my finished petal. Alright, so you see from the side, it is domed at the top, it is flat at the bottom, and it's not a very severe dome. It's a very gentle, sloped dome.